Hello, welcome to this tutorial about how to use a bow on a koto. First, we need a bow and rosin. So, what kind of bow and what kind of rosin should you use on a koto? Start with a bow. Something I have heard is some people prefer to use a base bow on the koto. And the thinking there was that maybe using a base bow, you'd have more hair on the bow and it's heavier and you can get a more grip on the string and it's easier to produce a sound. I actually think that a base bow is completely unnecessary. I happen to be using a violin bow, and in the past I've used also a cello bow, and I've tried a kid-size violin bow. And I think a violin bow works great. I think a couple of considerations about what kind of bow to choose would be, one, the length of the bow and the weight of the bow. And that's probably about it. And I'll tell you my preference for length. I think I like a longer bow, although it does not matter much, but in some instances, a longer bow might give you a chance to play a longer note. When you think of the length of the bow, if you think of a violin or a cello, the length is probably going to be limited to the length of your arm. In the case of a koto, you don't necessarily have that limitation because the instrument is not connected to your body. So, yeah, I could go back a lot further, theoretically. So, yeah, a longer bow might be useful, although it's definitely not required. As for the weight of the bow, I've heard some people like to maybe have a heavier bow because it's easier to get a sound. For me personally, I'd rather have a light bow. And the reason why is I want to be able to lift the bow at times, stop the sound and lift the bow. If I have a heavy bow, it's going to cause a fair amount of strain on my hands to lift the bow. So something light is a little bit preferable than something heavy. This is my opinion. Now, overall, the biggest message I want to get across is it's not going to matter so much what kind of bow you have. You definitely don't need to get an expensive bow, I think. I see absolutely no reason why that would be necessary. Any kind of bow you use is going to get a sound, is going to work. About rosin, I'm just using a violin bow rosin. When I first thought about what kind of rosin to use, my first inclination was to buy a sticky base bow rosin. Again, I was concerned about getting enough grip on the strings to make a sound. I don't use that rosin anymore. I find that it's unnecessary to have a really sticky rosin. A standard violin bow rosin is working fine. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if your bow is new, then you are going to need to use a lot of rosin on the bow the first time. So you'll want to, rub the rosin in to your bow really, really well. I don't need to do it now, but if you just bought a new bow, it won't have the rosin on the hair to start with. If for some reason you're not getting a sound, it'll be because you don't have enough rosin on the bow. After you have the rosin on the bow, you're also going to want to get some rosin on the strings of the koto, where you're going to play. For example, I'm going to play here, so I'm just going to rub some rosin here. Yeah, if you play here, okay, you have a little bit of rosin. So now we're ready to start. First, let me outline 3 possible approaches to bowing koto. The most common thing that I've seen is people want to bow towards the head of the koto on the strings where you would normally play with a tsume. Now, of course, you can do this. I prefer not to. I don't like this approach so much. The reason why, first of all, you're going to get rosin on the strings in the area that you are using the tsume. And this can cause, when you play with your tsume, you're going to get a kind of a grinding sound, I think it can also probably damage your strings. It is still possible to go ahead, play here, and then just be sure to wipe off the strings again before you play with tsume. But it is a bit of a hassle. The other consideration here is trying to get the sound on just one string. If you play very lightly, it works. If you play a little bit stronger, you're going to start getting the double, triple stops. Maybe that's what you want. But if not, one approach is you can take your left hand and mute the adjacent strings. You can go ahead and press down on them too, get them out of the way. And there you go. You can also do double stops on purpose if you want to. It's a good sound, but you'll have to deal with the rosin on the strings here. Now, the second method that I prefer is to play closer to the G. One reason for this, I'm not going to get the rosin on the strings in the area that I play with the tsume. That's one reason. Another advantage is that my hands are right here and I can use the oshi on the string. It's very useful. I can get a little bit of vibrato very easily. Also, it's a bit easier to play just one string at a time. You find the variation in height over here is very limited. There's a little bit more variation in the height of the strings over here. It's easier to play one string at a time, generally speaking. So that's my second approach. That's my recommended approach. Now, one more way, the method that I use the most often is a single string approach. Doing this, I find it's much more versatile. I can, play a whole range of notes. I can play glissandos. I can play melodies. I'm actually going to get into the details of how to do the single string method in a second video. So please be looking out for that. So from here, let me change the view a little bit, and I'm going to show you a bit about how to grip the bow. Okay, how should we grip the bow? First, very important, let me say, whatever you do, make sure it's not going to cause yourself injury. Very important. If anything in this video feels unnatural, if it's causing you pain, definitely don't do it. Please, don't hurt yourself. That being said, I will show you what seems to work for me. Hopefully that will speed up the process of finding the best grip for you. Whatever grip you do end up using, it should be comfortable. It should feel natural. It should be, ergonomically correct. It should have your hand in a strong position where you're not going to get tired very quickly or be feeling pain. Please keep that in mind. Now, when I bow, it'd be usually something like this. Okay. Here is my grip, like this. Now the key point, I'm using my ring finger in this notch here, and I'm using this part of my finger on top here, and for it to add a little bit of pressure. I can also put my pinky on this side, and doing so helps me to lift the bow without too much strain, without too much effort. So this is one possibility. It's not the only possibility. You can play around depending on your hand. Perhaps it might be more comfortable to just hook the pinky under there. I find it's better for me to hook the fourth finger under there. Another possibility, depending on the angle that you're bowing, you might want to just kind of grip the bow, kind of like this. Instead of using this part of your finger against the top of the bow, you can have this part of your hand against the top of the bow, and simply loosely wrap your fingers around. And actually, I'm probably still going to want to have my fourth finger in this notch here, or possibly my pinky. This way, I'm going to be able to keep my hand very relaxed, but still I'm able to exert quite a bit of pressure on the bow if I need to play loud. So please experiment, find what works best for you. Let me show you a little bit. Here's my standard grip. I can lift the bow, or the alternate grip, something like this. So find what works best for you. You might even want to try something a little different than what I'm doing. I'm just showing you a couple of possibilities that I think might help you find a good, comfortable position for playing on the koto. Again, whatever you do, whatever you decide on, be sure you're not going to give yourself an overuse injury with it. I definitely recommend don't try to play a lot when you first start out. Don't jump in and try to do 2 hours of practice. Now, just a few more pointers on how to bow and where to bow exactly. Generally speaking, if you play higher, you're going to want to play a little bit closer to, well, in this case, the G or the kaku, the head of the koto. If you play higher, you move a little bit to the right. If you play lower, you can move a little bit to the left. Also, if you play stronger, you want to move closer to the bridge or the head. And if you play quieter, you'll want to move out a little bit. So normal, if I'm playing high. Okay, or from here, if I play stronger, a little bit closer to the G. And if I'm playing quieter, a little bit further from the G. Now, as for next, the bow speed and the pressure. This is, you'll just have to play around to find the happy medium. Generally speaking, if I put too much pressure and a slow bow speed, then I get that lovely sound, which I like very much and I use a lot. But, you know, probably that's not what you're going for. So, yeah, too much pressure with a slow bow speed will give you a grinding sound. If you're playing lightly with a very fast bowing sound, you're going to get the higher harmonics. So you want to play around and find the nice happy medium. So that's about it for my first tutorial on how to use a bow on a koto. And lastly, you're going to want to be sure to wipe off the strings of your koto, wipe the rosin off of the areas that you got rosin on the strings. For example, I'm just going to wipe away the rosin with a dry cloth. Doesn't need to be wet, dry cloth will work. So thank you for listening, and please check out my next tutorial.